Zina Kondratyeva, senior Russian journalist, is joining us from the International Media Center at Bharat Mandapam. So Zina, namaste. Welcome to India.
Namaskar, thank you.
Let me first get a before I come to you for your own thoughts about what you feel about the arrangements. Let me also say hello to all our other guests who are with us. Thank you for your patience. Navdeep Suri, former Indian High Commissioner to Australia, is with us. Professor Peter Kuznick, Director, Nuclear Studies Institute, American University, is with us. Jennifer Zeng, member of the International Press Association and journalist, is with us. And we also have Professor Brahma Chalani, Strategic Affairs expert. So thank you very much for joining us on this very special broadcast. Quick word from Zina, because she is right where all the action is about to begin at the Bharat Mandapam. Zina, your thoughts about the arrangements? Did it surprise you? Are you happy? Are we taking care of you well?
I actually have to laud India. I worked in India for 10 years before that, so I'm coming back home, I can say. But the kind of Delhi I have seen this time is something new even to me, So yeah, I think India has done really a great job. People debate at which cost, so something to reflect upon. There are always things that can be done in a better way, but I think everyone is impressed. And I think Indians themselves are impressed. They should be, and it's a very good, opportunity for the country. I think the leaders the officials today have spoken about it, that it was a huge exercise for the Indian government to arrange G20, both the physical part of it and of course the diplomatic part of it. A lot of efforts have been put in by Indian diplomats and the Prime Minister himself. And these exercises shared by all the citizens of the country. So I think what is happening over this weekend in New Delhi is actually a good boost for India and understanding where India is globally, because we literally see the global arena changing a lot.
As we speak, Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey is also touching down, and he's also arrived. So one by one, the premiers are all arriving. Let me quickly ask Navdeep Suriji, how easy or difficult is it going to be for us to navigate this tightrope amidst nations? Is the world deeply polarized, as Rahul was just mentioning, or is India going to be able to play the role of a bridge?
Look, Anand, I think the word is polarized. The war in Ukraine is a reality. The positions that have been taken by the European Union, the United States, China, and Russia are well known. I would just argue, perhaps from a different perspective. I think it's important to get a final outcome document. But if we don't get a final outcome document, that's not the end of the word, because there's a lot of other stuff that's happening. And there are certainly some areas for which we can already take credit, regardless of whatever outcome document emerges or the chairman's statement emerges from the summit. Getting the African Union to the table is going to be a big deal. It sends a very clear message to Africa that we've stood by them. We have used our presidency to strengthen our relations diplomatically with a bunch of different countries. Just look at the Arab world, somewhere that I've served a number of years, that you've got UAE, Egypt, Oman, and you're hosting Sheikh Mohammed bin Salman as a state guest after the visit. So it really does strengthen our ties with the Arab world, as just one example. There are all of the bilaterals that are going to be happening, but also on a completely different plane. I think we are getting acceptance for initiatives of India like digital public infrastructure, a roadmap coming up perhaps from 24 to 26 to define how digital public infrastructure of the kind that India has created can become a template for financial inclusion and for the sustainable development goals. There's a lot else going on beyond Xi Jinping and Putin not coming. There's a lot going on beyond a joint statement or a final outcome document emerging. So I really think that over the next 36 hours, even as we keep our eye on the determined efforts of the negotiators burning the midnight oil to come some language, and perhaps English language will give enough flexibility to arrive at some kind of a consensus. But for me, that's not the end of the thing. I think the successes are already being chalked up.
Yes, there are a lot of bilaterals, there are a lot of pull asides, there are a lot of mutual engagements that will be that are there, agreements which will be signed. Like you said, the dimensions are far greater, but you always want to look at that which is not happening more than that which is happening. But Jennifer Zheng, if I may ask, what are the inconvenient truths that you are going to focus on?
I think we are really living in a very interesting era. I just saw your sign on the background, G20, the year of India's rise. I talked to myself, maybe we can add a small line behind or underneath that, which is the CCP's downfall. So it's very interesting. It's time. G20 was initially, I think, organized to show that the world-based largest countries' economies are working together to make a better world. But this year, Russia's President Putin and the Chinese CCP head Xi Jinping's absence tells about what kind of era we are living in this world. Of course, first of all, it's the Russia-Ukraine war, which makes Putin cannot attend this meeting. And secondly, why Xi Jinping skipped this meeting? That's a very, very big question to ask. For me, I think most important reason is of course, I believe it's the CCP's internal problems or difficulties or even crisis. China is now facing all sorts of crises from all fronts. I think Xi Jinping is too worried about leaving China, and so many people from the military staff to the high-level CCP, elders, CCP leaders, and to the general public. Everybody is becoming very angry about what Xi Jinping is doing to China. So he is very much concerned about his own personal safety if he leaves China. Of course, another big reason for him to be absent from this meeting is, I think, internally, he has already made a decision that, like what appeared to be a Twitter account of Xi Jinping's daughter said, and his pinned message said, give up the illusions, be prepared to fight, and we are in a high spirit. So that speaks of the CCP's major judgment about the global situation. They no longer believe they can have a good relationship with the US, with India, with the West. So a final showdown, you can say, between the CCP and the free world is inevitable. So under that kind of huge judgment, there is no much point for Xi Jinping to attend this G20 meeting anyway. So I think that's maybe the most two important reasons why Xi Jinping is not here when everybody else is.
You say that at a time, and I've got Professor Brahma Chalani and also Professor Peter Kuznick with us, but quickly, Rahul, I'll come back to you and then go across to the other two guests. There is a huge internal crisis. Some very senior voices within the CCP have actually criticized Xi Jinping, as per reports, for the way he's going about things. And they are quite literally down to the last yuan in their pockets, because China always boasted about the deep pockets. Is this true that they are going through an economic crisis? And like Jennifer Zheng said, rise of India, there should be a smaller one, says CCP's downfall. Would you agree with that?
Well, it's interesting because I'm just writing a piece which says the rise of India, the rise of Bharat, and the humbling of China. I was just working on it today. But look, while we can talk about the drawdown, economic drawdown in China, and its economy now is sputtering at about 3%, and there has been, because of nearshoring and friendshoring, a lot of money that is going out of the system that would have been predicated to China. I don't think the internal dynamics should be really over-amplified right now. I think fundamentally why Xi Jinping isn't here is because he believes that the order right now, the framework that of G20 and other groupings are not to his liking, because China has become isolated, given the fact that a large number of these groupings now are populated with a large number of allies of America. And he is giving priority to BRICS, to the SCO, to the BRI, which is going to be meeting very soon, right after this. As you know, almost 90 countries have pledged their participation in that. So he wants to upend the global order, not work within the framework that is already upholding this global order. He wants to break out of it so that platforms where China remains dominant can be actually the places that he wants to project power from. That's the real issue here at this moment. And obviously the other, and I think Mr. Brahmacharani will be able to explain this better, he also, of course, has a problem with India pushing through this very important grouping, the African Union. Because for a very long time, Xi Jinping and China has sought to project itself really as the voice of the global subaltern. And Modi has really stolen that show. We don't know if obviously the formal induction will take place at this particular summit. It could happen, many people are saying, in Brazil. But certainly one thinks that the joint communique will, in principle, open the doors for G21.
G21, but it's also because of China's own actions. The economic predatory actions of China is the reason why Africa nations now are turning around and saying, and of course the West hegemony.
The BRI reduces you to a client state. I think it's pretty clear now, and a large number of people are realizing that the way India has approached its power projection over the last 2-3 years, especially with COVID, etc., the vaccine Maitri, that India is looking to empower, not to dominate.
Not to dominate or weaken, correct?
Absolutely, or weaken. And Prime Minister Modi has a great deal of experience. He's done it here in India over the last 10 years, as you know, through the BJP's own I've sort of tried to suggest that they've been stewarded by Deen Dayal Upadhyay's own conception, which was Antyodaya and of course integral humanism.
Correct.
So that is what drives the Modi philosophy. India has lifted 400 million people out of poverty. And those that have been left out by the project of globalization are saying, wow, if this man can do it there, certainly by bringing out reform in our various fora, maybe he can use that reformed fora, revived fora, to bring those benefits to the rest of the world.
The other aspect is that the nations can trust India. They can trust India with the fact that we are not there with an expansionist design or to weaken them. We are there to strengthen them and get them. Kutumbakam. Yeah, that's not just a slogan or a nice sounding theme. We've walked that practice and we talked that practice because we've not been expansionist. Professor Brahmacharani and then Professor Peter Kuznick. Professor Brahmacharani, so should we focus and look beyond the absence of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping? Or will those two elements, those two nations and what they are part of actually be cast a shadow over the G20 Leadership Summit?
Well, there are two realities. The one reality is that the world has become increasingly divided. It has become increasingly divided not just because of the war in Ukraine. For example, the G20 has been facing a crisis long before the war in Ukraine began. But the war in Ukraine has only accentuated, it has widened the global divides. And clearly we have a new divide between China and Russia on one side and the Western Bloc on the other side. The G20 is an institution, an initiative dominated by the Western Bloc. By the Western Bloc, I mean not just the countries in Europe and North America, but also the allies like South Korea, Japan, and Australia. These countries together make up the majority of the member states of the G20. Xi Jinping likes to be the center of attention, whether it's the SCO summit or the BRICS summit. But had he come to the G20 summit in New Delhi, he certainly wouldn't have been the center of attraction. But of course, there's the wider issue, and Jennifer Zeng who did some plain speaking on why he's absent. But it's also important to keep in mind the fact that at a time when Chinese forces are massed along the India frontier, it would have been odd for Xi Jinping to come to New Delhi without making sincere efforts to defuse the military confrontation, a confrontation that could escalate. It could actually lead to very serious bloody clashes or even to a limited war. And one really expected that in the run-up to the G20 summit, Xi Jinping's regime would make such an effort to defuse the border standoff with India. But unfortunately, the message that Beijing has sent to India is that it does not believe in dialogue and diplomacy in resolving the crisis. It wants India to put up with China's land grabs of April 2020 and essentially stomach what China has done and pull back its forces from the frontier. So in other words, they're putting the ball in the court of the victim. They don't want to climb down from their perch and help defuse what is an increasingly dangerous military standoff. But coming back to the G20 is at a crossroads. Its main mandate is to coordinate policy to make the global economy more robust, more sustainable. But because of the international divisions, the G20 finds it increasingly difficult to play its role as the premier institution in charge of the global economy. And therefore, in this setting, given the international divisiveness, the real value of any G20 summit lies not in the pious commitments that any joint communique might produce.
Right.
The value of a G20 summit lies in the fact that it serves as a venue for bilateral meetings between various heads of state or government.
Right.
That's the real value of the G20 summit. For example, Prime Minister Modi is going to have about 15 bilateral meetings with various world leaders.
Yeah.
Some other world leaders present in New Delhi are going to have even more bilateral meetings than Modi. But that's the real value of the G20 summit, because these interactions are what makes the G20 the premier institution in the world.
And if the Africa Union also becomes an integral part, this G20 size then balloons or swells up to more than 90 nations. If you were to take the European Union and the Africa Union and the individual nations who are part of this entire grouping.